So let me give you 3 quotes from Evelyn's book. If God were small enough to be understood, God would not be big enough to be worshiped. God were small enough to be understood, God would not be big enough to be worshiped. Second, mysticism is the art of union with capital R reality. Reality beyond all this every day. Finally, for a lack of attention, 1,000 forms of loveliness elude us every day. For a lack of attention, 1,000 forms of loveliness elude us every day. The man who taught our course was one of those people that everybody respected in a way in which we were just in awe of him. He was like only 33, 34 years old. His name was Jim Liguri. He thought he wanted to be a monk and then didn't become a monk, but taught instead at the school. And one day I dropped by his apartment because I wanted to be closer to whatever it was he was about. And this is Berkeley, California, this time of year, sunny, warm. His door was wide open, and out of the door is this loud sound of Paco Bell's Canon in D, which I had never heard at the time. But, so first time you hear Paco Bell's Canon in D, I'm like, oh my God. It was just, and he said, I come home from teaching every day and I turn that on and it washes me, he said. So all I remember of our conversation was I asked him, what happens when we die? I'm 25 years old at the most. It's a 25-year-old's person question. And he looked at me and he countered and said, but where do we come from? What about our birth? And I never thought of that before. What a mystery it is that somehow, if you've had a child, they aren't a blank slate. No, every kid who comes in the world it's all there. This is just all there. You just see it play out as they get older, but they come in with everything. And I never thought of that. I'd been asking the wrong question. And Christian spirituality, I think, is about dealing with these mysteries and realizing we often ask the wrong questions. Jim, my teacher, lived 5 more years, was jogging one morning in Berkeley and just died on the street. He just fell over and died. And everybody thought, yeah, he was too good for this world. It was one of those people that he didn't have anything left to learn, obviously. He was just that kind of guy. Years later, I came across a very special quote from Ram Dass, who's always been important to me, whose name was Richard Alport, who taught psychology at Harvard and then became Ram Dass after he got fired. And he says, life consists of this. We are all just walking each other home. If that's the only wisdom you get in life, that's enough. Life consists of this, that we are all just walking each other home. If we could actually, attend to that, I think the world would be a much better place. Dealing with our death, to go back to where I came in, is a huge part of our spirituality. It's kind of a door to get us where we need to go. And evangelical Christianity begins, with that question and answers it with the words, receive Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, and you never have to think about it again. You're in, one and done. Very attractive. You're done. And that is one understanding of salvation. But that leads to absolutely no spiritual growth. In fact, it can be a door that's locked against it. Brian McLaren, who a lot of us have heard of and read, a former evangelical, said in a blog put out by Richard Rohr just last Wednesday. Well, it's been 2 Wednesdays ago. He said, I noticed that people who spend a lot of time in church often seem to be some of the meanest, more arrogant, and most judgmental people that I've met. I noticed the same being true of me at times as well. It seemed that Christianity had become for many people an evacuation plan, how to get your soul out of earth into heaven, rather than a transformation plan, how to help God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. William Sloane Coffin. Again, this is kind of a meditation. William Sloane Coffin said, before every birth and after every death, there is still God. Before every birth and after every death, there is still God. The abyss of God's love is deeper than the abyss of death. That's a wonderful statement of faith. I could sign under that. Say it again. Before every birth and after every death, there is still God. The abyss of God's love, that you just fall into, is deeper than the abyss of death. So how are we to live in this middle space, right? Colossians says, not a book I look into a lot, but it says, set your minds on things above, not on earthly things, for you died and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. He's trying to address the fact that people are worried about where they're going next. And the author, it's not Paul, but it's somebody else, said, get over that. Your life right now is already in some way hidden with Christ in God, which should evaporate all our anxieties. So Jesus is the one who, we're told, emptied himself. And we're not just saying he got rid of his heavenly powers or whatever would allow him to float above the earth. He'd emptied himself primarily of his ego. And you see that. He's not somebody who's pointing at himself, who's, as I said, about his healing power, never did anything as a performance, okay? And I'm gathering stuff from the whole world of spirituality, and I want to quote Ananda Kumaraswamy on this right now, who like to say, and get ready for these are zingers, all of these. I pray that death will not come and find me still unannihilated. I'll do that one again. I pray that death will not come and find me still unannihilated. In other words, that person dies happy if at life's end there's nobody left to die. There's no ego. There's no striving. There's no, Nobel Prize if they want it. I just remember this. I was having dinner with Carl Dennis, who's won the Pulitzer Prize for poetry, and somebody recognized him who was working for the press at the town we were in at the time, and came up and said, Mr. Dennis, what is it like to win the Nobel Prize? And he looked at me in the eye and he said, it lasted about a week. Which I thought was, and that explained why he was such a great guy, because it just, it meant something to him for about a week, which is great. He didn't carry it on his lapel or anything saying, Nobel Prize winner. Okay. I pray that death will not come and find me unannihilated. So our coming death can actually work as kind of a meditation. And I'm not being maudlin here. Those of us who are seniors, or late middle age, those of us in the second half of life, we carry around a secret. We are often thinking about those who have been attached to our lives, who've died and gone ahead of us, right? Like my friend Jim, who taught the mysticism class. And eventually we realize, right, that we have more friends on the other side than we have here. And we relate to them all the time. We do, I do. We remember the world that we shared with them that is, passing away because everything changes. Sometimes we take solace in knowing we won't be here when there are few, if any, reminders of that world. Of course, the healthiest people among us keep making younger friends all the time, right? Friends who keep us connected to the earth. Now, it's also true that our grandchildren do this probably in a big way, right? They don't know, my little grandbabies who are 4 and 6 now, don't know that secret connection I have with this world that's gradually one person at a time passing away. And that's fine. Their job is to hold on to my ankles and make sure I don't go up, right? Too fast or before my time, right? And it's as though those in the next world, though, are pulling us up toward them at the same time, while our grandchildren are pulling us down. It's this wonderful kind of stretching that goes on. So let me go back to my friend Jim, letting me know that I was asking the wrong question about my death. And instead pointing out the mystery of my birth, which was a wake-up call. And maybe it's no accident then that when I look at the Bible, over and over I see 2 themes that come to the fore: wake up and grow up. Wake up is probably best encapsulated in a little bit of Psalm 19, where it says, "The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims God's handiwork. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge. Yet there's no speech, there's no words, there's no voice. And yet that voice goes out through all the earth. And those words from whatever created us goes on forever." Jesus, in the Coptic Gospel of Thomas, says, and this is something that didn't make it in the Bible, but I believe it came from him. He said, "Pay no attention to those who say, 'Look there, Christ is coming,' or 'In the clouds, the reign of God is over there.' For God's reign is in fact spread throughout the earth, only people don't see it." People are looking for Jesus to come in the clouds or on a white horse or carrying a sword. Bullshit. It's all here already. What did Evelyn Underhill say? "For a lack of attention, 1,000 forms of loveliness elude us every day." The naturalist John Muir, I came from California, he was all over there. He said, "Most people are on the world, not in it." Most of us have no conscious sympathy or relationship to anything about them. Undiffused, separate, and rigidly alone, they're like marbles of polished stone, touching but separate. To those people who don't know why they're even here, who aren't connected deeply to anything or anyone in a spiritual way, Jesus said, "Behold the lilies. Behold the lilies." We are so bound to the earth by the lever of our ego, so intent, on ownership and acquisition, as if, we add to ourselves, we'll stay here longer, we'll add weight to our mortality or something. I'm not sure what that's about. That we miss the beauty that's free and everywhere, right? So this waking up leads naturally to the second message I see in the Bible: grow up. Well, Richard Rohr Father Richard Rohr, Franciscan, wrote a book called Falling Upward about the two halves of life. The second half of life is about growing up, letting go of what feeds our ego. This has to do with how we define ourselves. Who am I? Is it connected with what you own or what you do or your sense of what you will eventually be, right? Richard Rohr says, when you get your who am I questions right, all your what should I do with my life questions take care of themselves. Okay. So he says, to be transformed, that is to begin letting go in the second half of life of all that ego, that we rightly were invested in our first half. To let go, is to kind of unlearn what we used to know as the most important lessons of life. So we can be, converted to what we really are. As I was talking about the business of healing, is Jesus restoring us to our essential selves. And that's why some people, they go through cancer, and all of a sudden they're different people. Because they've let go of a false self that they based their life on before. And when we get to that place, when we let go of stuff, we find naturally that we're more connected with each other than we ever thought. That's why communion is so beautiful and so important. And the Trappist monk Thomas Merton teaches us more about this than just about anybody else. He had a mystical experience. Okay, we're talking about mysticism here. He had a mystical experience once out of the blue completely. He was on an errand for his monastery, which is outside of the city of Louisville. Aaron took him into downtown Louisville. And here's how he writes about it. He said, in Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the center of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people, that they were mine and I theirs, that we could not be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers. Suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people. They were mine and I was theirs. I quote Thich Nhat Hanh on this too. He said, from his Buddhist position, we are on this earth for one thing, in order to wake up from the illusion of our separateness from each other. If the lessons life is teaching you are that I'm yours and you are mine, then you're learning the right lessons. We're all just walking each other home. I think of my mother at this time because she was a borderline personality, and she worked really hard to die totally alone. It was work, it took work. She got what she wanted. I don't know why. In life, if you're going the right direction in second half and you're letting go and you're redefining your life apart from your ego, you quit asking the ego's question, why me? When circumstances mess with you. When you get cancer, you quit asking why me, and you say instead, why not me? Why not me? Which leads to a third oft repeated biblical message. Remember. It's like this. Before we were born, we knew how connected we were with everybody else. But we drank the water of forgetting just before our birth. That's the Greek myth, right? And the journey of life should lead us to remembering the bliss of that connection, of that littleness. This is a corporate kind of remembering. That's why the Bible says, we're reading this in 2024, and it says, remember you were slaves in Egypt. What? If you sense the connection, yeah. This is crucial because if we don't remember where we came from spiritually, that we were connected to those slaves in Egypt, the oppressed little people, then we will inevitably become Pharaoh. We will identify with the big people who have all the stuff. The egomaniacs, right? Who only think of themselves and who oppress everybody else and play them because they don't care a bit about them. Pharaoh appeals to our ego, the part of us that wants to hold on to everything forever. Well, the oppressed have a secret. They know they have nothing to lose, right? That's why you see pictures of children in villages around the world who have absolutely nothing, and you can't help often see how happy they are. So this business of remembering you were slaves in Egypt, identifying with the oppressed and not Pharaoh, is important in understanding where Christian spirituality came from historically. It came out of the 4th century desert tradition, because mystical prayer did not arise from nowhere. It came out of a reaction against a new pharaoh who was Emperor Constantine, who was, in the 300s, who made Christianity the state religion. He was a fox. He was smart as a fox. He knew he couldn't beat Christianity, so he said, we'll make it a state religion. And he declared it to be so. And he got all these bishops together who were fighting over the nature of Jesus, whether he was half human and half God, or all human, or somehow both. And he said, you guys go to this place in Nicaea. I'll get you the Marriott. I'll book the whole thing. And you stay there. I don't care how long you stay. You just figure that Jesus thing out. And you come up with, I only have one agenda item connected to that. I don't care if he's God or human. It matters nothing to me. I just want to make sure that when you're done, you understand that and you tell everyone, I'm the main act on earth. Smart guy, right? That was the moment when Orthodox Christianity was branded. That's when the Nicene Creed got written, the standard set of beliefs. Most of Christians at the time applauded that. They were glad that persecution of Christians was finished. They were so grateful. They just accepted Constantine's version of Christianity, Constantine and his bishops, who were on the take. I'm a little jaded when it comes to this kind of thing. But there were others, and these are my people, who were much less pleased with the Romanization of Christianity, who said, you want us to become your brand of Christian? Constantine, you and the emperors, they were just killing us last week. You think we're going to forget that? Why should we trust them as the keepers of the true faith of Jesus? They realized, the Romans had killed Jesus. They realized that anything of Jesus and his teachings, this Prince of Peace, would be lost completely if they gave the whole thing over to Constantine. So instead of attending Roman churches, they went out into the deserts of Palestine and Egypt and Syria And they established a very simple form of Christianity based on prayer, silence, simple life, simple work, the repetition of the Psalms, and weekly communal worship. Again, Thomas Merton, who talked about that mystical experience he had on the corner of 4th and Walnut in Louisville, said, "These simple men," they were mostly men, but there were women too, "who lived their lives out to a good old age among the rocks and sands of Egypt and Syria, only did so because they had come into the desert to be themselves, their ordinary selves, and to forget a world that divided them from themselves," right? We're talking about being restored to ourselves. They went out there to be themselves, their ordinary selves, not a self that's attached to an automobile, right, or a career or an award, but themselves, essentially. A world that fed their egos, right? They had to get away from that because that was their counterfeit self. St. Anthony, who I'm going to talk about when we have a first class, the first Sunday in Lent, which is what, 2 Sundays from now? St. Anthony was the person who started the whole monastic tradition. Again, to show you what a fox Constantine was, he noticed this thing happen, that these people, holy people, went out in the deserts, and so he asked who the leader was. They told him it was St. Anthony, and so he had somebody take Anthony a letter. Anthony, who was illiterate, and the letter was delivered to Anthony by one of his people, and he said, "Yeah, I don't even want to hear it. If it came from Constantine, we're ignoring that. Forget it." The Apostle Paul understood these things. He says at the end of Philippians, his last letter, "I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty." Again, we're talking about our attachment, our ego's attachment to the world. I know what it is like to be in need, and I know what it's like to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. He could have said, I've learned the secret of being myself, no matter what. Whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want, whether I win the Nobel Prize or go to jail, he could have said. I do all this through the one who gives me strength. He learned how to live above circumstance. It's the way to free yourself from the ego. So, I did a class, 1st January, I was here on Buddhism and, on Asian religion. And I gave you 3, those of you who were here at that time, 3 rubrics from Buddhism that are so helpful. And it goes this way. One Buddhist teaching is, you can judge a person's life by 3 things. By how much you loved, by how gently you lived. Gently, I mean, your carbon footprint, maybe, how much of a ruckus you made. And third, this is for those of us in the second half of life, by how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. You could spend a whole lifetime unpacking the wisdom there. By how gracefully you let go of things not meant or no longer meant for you. Again, it's about getting down to our essential self. The older you get, the more you should be able to identify those things that are not meant for you, right? In the course of a lifetime, we are called upon to give up more and more until we give up the last thing. The Hindus understand this. That's why when they talk about death, they say what happens at death is that we let the body drop, right? We let the body drop. It's like, okay, give them this way, give them that way, give them this way, give them that way. What do I have to left to give up. That lasts a little bit. You get the sense of the freeing quality of that? Okay, so now to be a little more pragmatic. I want to talk about prayer for a few minutes. Yeah, we're doing okay. In 1981, I became pastor of Grace Presbyterian Church over in Northeast Portland, where I met Shirley, who's right here in the front, because she'd grown up there partly. And as a new pastor, I was, 30 years old? I didn't know anything. And I didn't even know how to pray properly. But I'd long been drawn to the monastic traditions, these things we've been talking about, even though I didn't know a whole lot about them. But I'd had my class in mysticism, and I'd known my friend Jim. So I had spent a week at a place called San Damiano, which is the monastery that Francis had started in Assisi. I spent a week there years before that. But anyway, so I'm in my new church, and I know there's a Trappist monastery in Carlton, Our Lady of Guadalupe. So I went out there, and I met Father Timothy, who had been a pilot in the Korean War. And, the war had turned him into a monk, as war can do. And I asked him about prayer. I said, what is prayer? And he did this. He said, prayer is just a flower opening to the sun. And he just did this a bunch of times. He didn't have to say a thing. And somehow I was ready at that moment to get that there is something of God that's drawing us out. Prayer of the heart, says Richard Rohr, that's what I was learning, occurs when prayer moves from merely mental repetition, forced along by our own efforts, to an effortless and spontaneous self-repetition of a prayer, any prayer, that we say that is connected to the core of our being, our hearts. So I learned that, and maybe sometime we'll talk about that kind of prayer. But I want to go on from there and tell you this story because it's closer to my heart right now. The day I said goodbye to the guys who picked up all my stuff in Salt Lake City in order to move here and be pastor here, I was had my phone on in the car traveling west because my daughter had had a mammogram that day, which was hopefully routine, but it wasn't. And so I found out all at once that she had breast cancer, and she had a very aggressive form of breast cancer. And she's doing fine now. Praise God. As far as I know, she's doing great. So that's 3 years, almost 3 years, 2.5 years ago. But what I learned pretty much very quickly was that my prayer life, even this one, wasn't enough to deal with the anxiety I was going through as a dad about her suffering and all my worries connected with her. So I was trying to figure out how to deal with that. And after one of many visits to her at the time, I was coming back on the airplane. You have a couple hours in the airplane from Denver. And I was listening to a talk by Ram Dass. Remember, we said our whole life is just walking each other home. And Ram Dass is talking about prayer. Oh, he's talking about prayer. And he talks about having this puja table. That's P-U-J-A. And I taught Hinduism, right? Little do I know about it, but I've taught it. And there's the Hindus who are sannyasins who are, who look down their noses at people who do puja. Puja is having a little home shrine where you light a candle and you light some incense and you say certain prayers to the little objects you have in your little shrine. And I always thought, oh, that's for sissies, that's kindergarten Hinduism. And Ram Dass, who I have such regard for, was talking about his puja table and how it was important to him. So life will do this to you. You look down at a thing and then you find out it's the most important thing, right? So I thought, maybe I should have a puja table. Maybe this could be my way of dealing with all my anxieties about my daughter, Margaret. And so all of a sudden, I just took out a piece of paper and a pen, and I remembered that I had a wonderful old mission-style table that I was not using. It was a little desk. It's Bunny's desk right now. But anyway, at the time, that's what I had. And I had this antique wooden chair and that I wasn't using. And I made a list of the things I was going to put on that for my own home shrine. So I put a rosary someone gave me. I lost one. Here we go. I put a rosary and a cross somebody gave me at a particular moment in my life, and another cross that reminded me of the cross at San Damiano in Assisi that I visited, and picture of my best friend in ministry standing next to Thomas Merton and Thich Nhat Hanh, and picture of my own family, and a lot more pictures like those. And it kind of helped me connect a lot of parts of my life. And I found that the table began being kind of like a machine of prayer in which all the elements were kind of communicating with each other about my daughter, on behalf of my daughter, so that when I couldn't pray, I somehow sensed the table was, right? The shrine was. And something happened that I want to repeat. I was anxious, having moved back to Portland, to get back out to the Trappist Abbey, where I'd spent quite a lot of wonderful time. And I couldn't remember why I wanted to go there so much. Because I remembered the man who taught me about prayer, but I wasn't connected to him. I remembered one of the monks who made me laugh, but I wasn't connected with him. I kind of forgot what my connection was. It'd been a long time since I'd been there, 15 years probably. And I couldn't go there anyway because of COVID. They had closed the doors. So I one day was driving, thinking about this. What is my connection? Why do I want to go there? And I remembered Brother Martin, who's an Hispanic monk who came with all the people from the Abbey to Carlton from New Mexico. He's from Mexico, the old Mexico himself, and I had forgotten all about this man who had been there when my daughter was born, and who, when I'd go there for two days or 3 nights, I forgot how long I'd stay, he would say, "I'm praying for your daughter," the whole time. I'd forgotten that. And so after I was driving, so I went home, I got my computer on, I went to the website of the Abbey, and Brother Martin had just died. I just felt, I'd seen his face. I mean, his face had just shown up for me. And then I found out he had just died. So anyway, he became the most important person on my table right away. And then when my daughter was better and done with all her treatments, I wasn't using the table, so I put everything away, and we brought the table in here. And then, the world being what it is, I started thinking, I need my table back. Not that table, but a table. And so I set one up in my desk at home. And one of the things I put on it, I'll tell you, was a picture of this little Palestinian boy who was murdered, October 7th, after the war of Israel and Gaza began. I heard about him dying, and I couldn't bear to look at any picture of him or to learn anything about him. It was just too scary and painful to think that he would give his life because he was Palestinian for that. It just made me so upset. And then I thought, okay, I need to have his picture and I need to put him on my table. There is something I can do that I didn't think I could do because it was too painful. And so he's a real important part of my table now. And I recommend this to people now. It's very, very helpful. And what I find is I'm dealing with something in my mind and I'm journaling, and all of a sudden I look over there and there's Thomas Merton looking at me. And I think, what would Thomas Merton say about this? And sometimes I get some wisdom that I wouldn't have found otherwise. So I commend that as a possibility. And so on top of that, just 2 weeks ago, I'm in this class online with Father Richard Rohr from the Franciscan Center in Albuquerque on this whole subject of two halves of life, based on his book called Falling Upward. And here's what he said in the thing. He said, and this just, it was like dropping the other shoe. He said, and this is, he's in conversation with these two young people. And he mentions Jean Houston and asks if they've read her. He says she was considered Hillary Clinton's spiritual guide. I read one of her early books, and she said, to preserve devotion, I encourage all of you to create an altar in your house. And he says, now this is something sophisticated people don't do. And he had my attention. Jean Houston says, and I want you to put all your sacred objects, because you have them, on this table. It's a picture of your mother, a candle you were given when you made your first communion, or whatever it might be. And he says, I remember my mother saved her candle from her first communion, and she always said, now when you bury me, you put that in my hands. That would mean something to her. That's devotion. This is what we're talking about, devotion. And you were talking about this earlier, he says to one of the young people, that it's heart-related, it's ritual-related. It can't be just words. It's the sacredness an object has for you, something that makes you want to kneel and kiss. If you're above kissing stones, you see it if you've ever been to the Holy Land, and probably most places are not authentic there, but it doesn't matter. When I was in the Holy Land and I kissed so many stones, my lips were chapped. Because people said, Jesus did this here, Jesus did that there, and everybody gets down and kisses those things. It's devotional. Don't ever be beyond devotion, because it very quickly, in ritual, connects the head to the heart. It's one thing I worry about, he says, with a lot of people who've even followed me or listened to me. They have a good theology, they have a liberal perspective on politics, they have a broad worldview, but I'm going to say it here, they don't have devotion. They would stand at the back of the crowd while everybody knelt and kissed the stones on the trip to Jerusalem. And that disappoints me, he says. It's only people with devotion that are going to pass on whatever wisdom you have to the next generation. That's my belief. People who just believe things in their head and not in their heart are no good at passing anything on of value. So, I don't want to go on. One piece of wisdom to finish this bit with, from Pema Chodron, who's a Zen Buddhist, who says, maybe the only enemy is that we don't like the way reality is now, and therefore wish it would go away fast. But what we find as practitioners is that nothing ever goes away until it has taught us what we need to know. Nothing ever goes away until it has taught us what we need to know. I think I've been saying that all along here, and I thought it'd be a good place to finish. Okay, we still have a few minutes. And if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, because you all have wisdom on these subjects, I'm going to ask you to use this because we want the Zoom friends and those who are watching this on the recording to see it.
This has been so rich. I wanted to say amen a few times. But I thought I would tell you all, who I'm sure you're all engaged intensely as I have been, that this morning in my class with children, we had 11 children this morning in my class. They're kindergarten, first, second, third grade children. We made mezuzahs. You'll remember the mezuzah is a little object that is hollow on the inside, and it's part of a practice of our Jewish brothers and sisters to put that mezuzah on the upper 1/3 of a door frame, because inside is a text called the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your strength. And the rest of the text goes on to say, tie it on your foreheads, tie it on your arm, put it on your doorpost. In other words, every day, every hour of your life, remember to put God first. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. So our Jewish brothers and sisters, as they walk through any door, the front door or any door inside the house, they put their fingers to their lips and touch the mezuzah. I think it's a beautiful ritual, and the children really were engaged and made their own mezuzahs today, which they get to take home next week.
Yeah, because they get ritual naturally, right? Yeah. Then you become too smart for it, to your own detriment. Yes, sir.
You said three things at the start.
Oh, yeah.
You said three quotes at the start.
Yeah.
Would you repeat those?
Sure. This is from Evelyn Underhill's book on mysticism. If God were small enough to be understood, God would not be big enough to be worshipped. Second, mysticism is the art of union with reality. Okay, so it gets rid of all those ego things that keep us from our essential selves and essential connection with one another and God. And then finally, the third one, for a lack of attention, 1,000 forms of loveliness elude us every day.
Anybody got attention?
We might have reached, okay, go ahead.
This is not a question really, but Scott, could you talk a little bit more about how we're going to continue this class on Zoom?
Oh, yeah.
And also just to encourage people to join us on Zoom and to consider, being present in the class and contributing that way. Because sometimes Zoom can be a really intimate, nice discussion format. So if you haven't tried a Zoom class before, please join us. But why don't you say something about that?
Okay, yeah. Class begins 2 Sundays from now, 7 o'clock at night to 8, no more than an hour. We're going to look the first Sunday evening at these people who went out into the deserts of Syria and Palestine and Egypt to get away from Roman creedal Christianity and to try to preserve what Jesus' teachings were, this heart religion, so they wouldn't become tools of the empire. Then the second week, we're going to look at St. Francis, and Eileen is going to be talking about that since she's a Franciscan at heart. And then the next week, Mark Lewinsky, who's also part of the Franciscan Center, is going to talk about St. John of the Cross's Dark Night of the Soul, which gives us, a view of mystical Christianity from the shady part of it. And then, which people who are in second half of life are most ready for, I think. Then after that, there is, no, I forgot. Julian of Norwich comes before St. Francis. So that's actually the second. And Julian of Norwich, wonderful 13th century anchorite, 14th century anchorite, meaning she was in a cell. And she was one of the first people to talk about God as woman, and talks about sin in a way that all of a sudden you go, of course, now I understand. There's no shame at all connected with what we're dealing with when it comes to dealing with our failures. She's just amazing. So then after her is St. Francis and Clare, actually St. Francis and his friend Clare. Then the week after that, Dark Night of the Soul. Then two modern saints, Thomas Merton, who we talked about, who had the mystical experience at 4th and Walnut in Louisville. And finally, no, he's the last, right? And just before him is Saint Therese of Lisieux, who talked about my little way of connecting with Jesus. So anyway, you got the basic idea. And that's 6 Sunday nights in Lent, all the way up through Palm Sunday. And I'll just close with this. This is probably the most important thing on my puja table. It's a cross that my daughter painted when she was little, and it's kind of the anchor of the whole thing. Thank you.